Hi everyone, it's Katie and today we have a deck review. I wanted to talk to you about the Dark Days Tarot. Now this deck I bought secondhand actually after seeing it in store. When I first saw it come out online, I don't know, a little while ago now, I appreciated it, but it didn't do a huge amount for me, to be perfectly honest. Then I saw it in a store, so I actually got to have a look at the cards in person. And I loved them. So not too long after that I managed to score a copy secondhand on one of the Facebook groups, and I haven't looked back since. This has honestly become one of my favorite decks. It's a deck that I haven't really stopped using since I got it and has definitely become a go-to for me. So as per usual with my reviews, we'll start by talking about the hardware and then I'll get into discussing my own personal experiences with the deck, how I found working with it and reading with it. So this is an independently published deck, but you can get it on shops like Little Red Tarot, which is awesome. And it comes in this two-part hard box, which opens up very easily. The deck and the box are kind of like a square shape, so they're quite unusual, not a traditional tarot size at all. And as with the cards, the box is black and white. It's actually a really cute little box. I love the artwork in this deck and it's kind of just represented all over the box. On the top we have a card from the deck. I love too how the bottom of the box, the part of the box that you don't see when it's closed, it's also decorated, and on each side we have the symbols of the suits. So for example, we have cups and swords. I just think they're really super cute. There is actually quite a bit of space in the box, kind of like above where the cards in the book sit. The cards kind of will rattle around a little bit, but not so much that I would be worried about them getting damaged. And it does mean that if you want, you can like put a little crystal on top or something. It does come with a little white book. It's actually really well constructed. I really quite like this little white book. At the beginning of the book, we have a couple of cute little acknowledgements, and then we do have an introduction. This also includes an explanation of the directions. Because the deck is square, it means that not only can we have upright and reverse meanings, but we can also have right and left facing meanings. So we have kind of just a couple of keywords broken down for each direction. So if you want to read the deck like this, I personally have chosen not to, but if you kind of, shuffle the cards around so they're not all upright facing, depending how you lay them out can change the meaning. So it explains here that the upright meaning is the full moon energy, manifestation and affirmation. The right card, rotated 90 degrees to the right, is the last quarter or waning moon energy, which is completion and reflection. Our reversed card meaning, so upside down, is the new moon energy, renewal, rest, retirement, reversal. And our left facing card, which is our card rotated 90 degrees left, is our first quarter waxing moon energy, which is hustle and development. So I really like that there's an explanation about especially the differences between the right and the left facing and kind of the logic behind that. Even though for me the directions is something I've chosen not to include. I don't tend to read with reversals, so I haven't really thought about using the directions in this either. So even though I don't use these directional meanings like explicitly in terms of I don't shuffle the cards so they all come up differently in the spread, I still like to have a look at those meanings, because to me, the upright facing card, as I read them, kind of incorporates all of those meanings depending on the context and the position of the spread. So even though I don't use directions like literally in terms of how I draw my cards out, I do like that we have all these different meanings because they're slightly different perspectives on the same card, and I think each card contains the whole. And so here, for example, the Ace of Swords, our upright meaning is inspiration, spark of courage. Our right facing meaning is growth, possibility. Left is outpowered by doubt. Reversed is defeated by indecision, different opportunity. So I think having these different messages, even if you choose like me not to use the directional readings, it's great to have a more holistic understanding of the card and what all these different individual cards, they have lots of messages within them. Then we also have a brief breakdown of numerology, I suppose, and the numbers of tarot, which I think can be really helpful, especially if you're beginning. And then we jump right into the meanings of the cards. And each card has 2 pages. On the left-hand side, we have a reproduction of the image of the card, which I love. And then on the right hand side page, we have the meanings and descriptions of the card. So we have just a couple of keywords each for each of the directions. And then we have kind of a short paragraph, a sentence or two, a meaning of what that card might mean if it comes up in a reading. And even though these are very short, I've actually found them really helpful and interesting. I think they're great little messages. They're concise, but they're really quite useful as well. And I will note that they always feel relevant to the imagery. Some decks you get, every now and then, it can feel like 2 separate people wrote the book and the deck and they didn't even collaborate. Like the book can often just be a really generic listing of what generally the Rider-Waite-Smith meaning is. And then the card can be really, really different. This deck doesn't feel like that at all. It feels like they belong together, like the meanings written in the book represent the cards, or vice versa. Down in the bottom right hand corner of the right hand page, I really like this, that we have the suit symbol, which means that it's quite easy just to flick through if you're looking for a certain card. Then we have 2 pages of spreads. These are really brief. I think we have 4 different spreads, but this includes a 1 card draw. And then on the very back page, we kind of have like a visual representation of how to read this deck with the directions. And then it also associates the astrological signs with each of the directions. Now that's the deck in the box. Now we're going to talk about the cards. I don't know if there have been reprintings of this deck, and I don't know which one I personally own. But as you can see, the cards are square. They're actually kind of smaller than I imagined them to be when I first saw them online. They actually feel like quite a normal sized deck, even if they are square. They're very, very easy to handle. The cards themselves are actually really quite flexible. So I would say they're on the thinner side, but for me they never feel flimsy. The deck feels like solid and like it's not going to fall apart. I've used this deck personally a lot, including riffle shuffling, and it's in really good nick. Like, I'm not super rough on my decks, but I'm also not particularly precious with them. And a deck with black backings, or black cards in general, often tend to chip a lot. Now I can't say that this deck looks brand new, but it's certainly holding up a lot better than other decks that I've had with black borders. So even though the cards are thin, on the thinner side, I would not say that they feel cheap. They don't feel flimsy at all to me. It just feels really flexible and easy to shuffle. The backing is beautiful. It's this black and white kind of mandala almost of the different symbols of the suits. It's really pretty. Now you will notice that the majority of the cards are black, but some are white. That's because the major arcana have the white background, whereas all of the minors have black. So it's really easy to tell them apart, and when they pop up in a reading, and you have a lot of major arcana in a reading, which often means some pretty big changes or something pretty big happening in your life, it's very easy to tell straight away. Now I normally put my cards in order for reviews, but I just couldn't. I'm having such a good experience with this deck at the moment, and I've spoken before about how putting a deck back in order is kind of like a reset for me. And normally I don't really overthink about doing that for a review, but for this time I knew that that's not what I was going to be doing. I don't want to put this back in order. I'm still going to flip through a lot of the cards, but I did do an unboxing. And in that unboxing, I did go through in order each and every card. So I'll leave a link to that below. So instead, I'm just going to talk you through my experience with this deck, the artwork, what I love about it. So firstly, I'll say that I've been really taken by this imagery, a lot more than I ever expected that I would. I was a little bit worried about the black and white. I don't have fantastic eyesight, and so sometimes I can really struggle, especially the black backgrounds in particular I was worried about. But there are really no cards that I struggle to see. There might have been 1 or 2, but for the most part, the images have been done beautifully well. They're very, very clear. There's still a lot of detail in them. They're not simplistic, but the way that the art has been done is really effective, I think. I quite like the idea of black and white decks, but I think a lot of the time, either the artwork for me can be quite difficult to see and make out, or it becomes really simplistic. Like, I'm thinking like the Linda Famira or whatever it's called. I forget. There's a German deck that's black and white that is very, very simple. And it kind of goes either way. Whereas with this deck, I think the monochrome kind of theme has been executed, I would say, almost flawlessly. Like, it does not feel like you're missing any detail because of the lack of color, and it doesn't feel overwhelming to the eye or confusing either. I think it's been done really well. I can't stress that enough. It's all just genuinely beautiful. Like, I love these images. I would genuinely hang some of these up on my walls. I think they're lovely. There's almost a cutesy, whimsical element to them, but they're not too cutesy, if that makes sense. They're not kitsch. I think they're also just really, really pretty and alluring. And a lot of the images, they're really symbolic, and they're really effective in portraying or conveying some kind of emotional connection. For me, I definitely get a lot of different feelings popping up when I look at these cards, which I think is great, and is probably why I've had such a good reading experience with this deck, because I think for me at least, my intuition is very tied to my emotional experience. And so when cards come up and they pull up an emotion for me instantly, it's a lot easier for me to tap into an intuitive understanding of what that card might mean for me. So it feels like quite a modern, unique deck, but it's still very much rooted in Rider-Waite-Smith in terms of the meanings. A lot of the cards, they have been represented in quite unique ways, which I really like. I really appreciate when we have decks that kind of show us a new face to the same card that we've seen again and again. But it definitely didn't feel like too much of a learning curve. Some of the court cards, however, feel quite different to me. Not all of them, but a couple of them I think are really quite different takes on the cards, just in terms of what we're used to seeing, I suppose. The court cards especially, we're used to seeing them as very character driven, and even though a lot of these cards, the court cards, are still very character based, not all of them are. A lot of them we don't see a face. Some of them we don't see a single person either. So in that way, I think they are really quite different. To me, I kind of think of them more as these concepts, almost like these masks. I don't know if that makes any sense, but they do feel quite distinct from other court cards that I've seen. And for a little bit, it was like a little bit, especially I think it was like the Page of Swords. I was like, oh, I don't think I've seen a court card like this before. But now that I've kind of settled into them, I really enjoy them. Now, in terms of how I've enjoyed reading with this deck, it has been an incredible experience. I have had such accurate readings with this deck. It's one of those experiences that the very kind of skeptical, agnostic side of me just can't help but look at in amazement. I can give you a couple of examples. I don't want to share all of them with you, but these messages have just been so explicit that it's hard to believe that they're just chance, or, you know, that I'm just drawing random cards. Now, these cards that have been super explicit are in answers to really specific questions, like tangible questions. Like in terms of, you know, what I should think, or, you know, what's going on mentally, they tend to be more symbolic, which, you know, makes sense. But when I've asked explicitly, what should I do, or what's going to be the outcome, I've had very, very clear answers. For example, when I was kind of going through my little overwhelm period towards the end of last year, I was kind of asking this deck the sort of things that I needed to be doing to take care of myself. And I would very often get the Chariot, which is a girl on a bike. I bought myself a bike last year and have been doing a lot of riding, and it's really good for me mentally and also physically, not just the exercise, but like I've been told by some doctors and things that it's the way that those muscles work that are really good for certain things that I have going on with my body. And also I shared this one on my Instagram page. There's sewing. Sewing is also something I started doing last year, and so I just kept getting these two cards of what should I be doing to help myself, what should I be focusing on right now. And it was these two things, these kind of hobbies that I developed for myself that I wasn't giving enough time to, and that in turn was affecting me really negatively. And so I needed to step back into those things that were good for me physically, mentally, emotionally. But one of the most explicit examples that I feel comfortable sharing that just kind of was so good, I didn't feel confident sharing the reading with anyone when I first did it because I was scared because it was too clear. And that was when I went for a job interview at a bookshop. I've always wanted to work in a bookshop. It was an unexpected opportunity. I didn't even think I was going to get an interview, let alone get the job. But I did a reading when I got the interview for, you know, kind of, I did a bit of what to expect and what I can do. And then ultimately, what would be the outcome? Would I get the job? And I got the Seven of Pentacles. Which is very literally money coming out of a book. And it didn't really come as a surprise to me, even though I wasn't really confident in how I performed in the interview. I didn't have the experience they were looking for. I kind of knew what my answer would be, and it turned out I did get the job. So I've just had a lot of experiences like this with this deck, where it's just ridiculously accurate in ways that, you know, it's not necessarily the meaning of the card, but it's just literally what is in the image is what happens. And so that's why, even though I really like the guidebook and I do use it, and I do read this deck still like a tarot deck, as I said, especially if it's more, you know, like what's going on for me, and, you know, what can I focus on, or what can I focus on for the day, those sort of questions. I still very much use this as a tarot deck, but every now and then, perhaps more often than any other deck that I've ever used, regularly enough, it's just the image is very explicit. That is explicitly my answer, is what is on the card. And I love when that happens. That experience is just so fun and exciting to me as a tarot reader. So I suppose in that way, this deck is really practical and grounded. Like, you know, we have those examples of someone literally sewing and someone literally going for a ride on their bike. It's very rooted in everyday experiences. And I think it's very personal in that sense too. But equally, it feels quite dreamlike. There's a lot of cards that are quite fantastical. They're quite magical. So it's this beautiful mix of both, of very grounded practical things, but also very beautiful magical ones. And I love that. I love that combination and how well that all sits together in one very cohesive deck. And I suppose that's just a really beautiful reminder that the magical is in the everyday. That's kind of what this deck reminds me of, that our everyday little experiences like sewing are and can be and should be magical experiences too. I was also kind of curious about the titling of the deck, The Dark Days. It definitely does not at all feel like a dark deck to me. I mean, obviously a lot of the cards are dark in terms of, you know, they have a black background literally, but it doesn't feel dark to me like, you know, some other decks might. Instead, how I've kind of experienced this deck is more that it's the light in the dark, kind of like it represents or sings to that space inside of us that transforms in hard times. And in that way, this deck I think is also really connected to the self-care and self-awareness that is needed in those times. There's also other really interesting juxtapositions in the sense that a lot of this imagery feels really childlike. It feels really whimsical, but then there's also a really, really deep wisdom and maturity about this deck. Kind of like the child and the crone are sitting together in the moonlight and learning from and giving to each other simultaneously. That's kind of what this deck feels like to me, and it's genuinely beautiful to experience. So I went through trying to select, you know, some of my favorite cards to show you, and I don't know that I can, because there's very few cards that don't jump out to me as incredible. Certainly there are some that I adore, but there's a lot of those cards. I think this is a deck that has just, for me, it's a great success. I love all of the images. I think so many of them are just iconic, are standouts to me in the tarot world. To me, I think these are kind of, I don't know, I think this deck has kind of raised a bar for me. It's set a new standard in a lot of ways, which is really interesting because I was not expecting that from this deck. This was a deck that I didn't really have on my radar for so long, and yet now that I have it and I've worked with it, I almost can't imagine my tarot collection without it. There is a lot of moon imagery in this deck, and obviously those directional readings have been associated with the phases of the moon. This deck is really tied into moon work for the creator, and it definitely has that element for me, although I'm less committed to that side of it, I suppose. But there's definitely a theme of cycles of lunar energy, and there is also a pretty strong representation of you know, female identifying individuals in this deck, and there are a couple of examples of explicit biology, I suppose. For example, the Queen of Cups has other stuff going on, but it's pretty clearly like a uterus. I do love though that the Empress isn't a pregnant woman. I don't have anything explicitly against, like I don't think there should never be another pregnant woman in the Empress card ever again. But as somebody who doesn't identify with motherhood, that doesn't want children, and also just appreciates that, you know, not everybody can have or wants children, and not everybody associates, you know, femininity with motherhood. I don't have a problem with the Empress being a mother, but I don't enjoy the fact that the Empress is more often than not depicted as a mother, if that makes sense. So I do kind of love that this deck adds to the list of decks that doesn't have a mother as the Empress. So basically, to summarize, I'm in love with this deck, in case you haven't been able to tell so far. It's genuinely brought so much joy into my life and really helped me reconnect with my intuition during a time where I was kind of really overwhelmed and kind of facing a bit of burnout. I think it's genuinely beautiful. I love how interesting it is and how unique it is. I love that it straddles the line of fantasy and reality so seamlessly and beautifully. I suppose in a lot of ways it's really kind of brought in that moonlight quality, that, you know, that when moonlight hits a landscape that you're so familiar with, it kind of just makes everything look a little bit off, like you're not quite sure what's real and what isn't. I suppose that element has been achieved really beautifully in this deck. There's definitely a heavy association with the moon, obviously, and the cycles of the moon, but it doesn't feel like a moon deck. There's lots of little moons throughout, but if you didn't really know about the explicit, you know, the authors associated, the directions with the moon and everything like that, it doesn't feel like a moon tarot deck. but I do like the quality that that perspective has brought to the cards. So I love the imagery and I love reading with this deck. I love the experience I've had and I love the perspective of the cards. I just think they're interesting and unique and beautiful, and reading with this deck and the experiences that I've had, and it's not like I've had these experiences just, you know, once or twice. This is like a consistent thing that I've been experiencing with this deck, which just makes it kind of a standout experience for me. So this deck was a big surprise for me with just how much I've fallen in love with it. Really, really unexpected, but I genuinely could not be happier that I have it and that it's in my life. I just feel really lucky to have experienced a deck like this and to have had an experience like this. So if it's something that you're attracted to, I could not recommend it more highly. I know different decks are for different people and, you know, you'll be drawn to what you're drawn to. But for me, the only regret I have is that I didn't get it sooner. But that is all for this review. I hope you found this interesting or useful in deciding if this is a deck for you or not. And if you have any comments or questions, as always, please leave those below. I'll do my best to get back to you. And until next time, so much love. Bye.